All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the last day of Anarchapulco. Oh, I hope you've been having as much fun as I have. So, I want to start off with a quick question. I guess we'll do maybe by a raise of hands. How many of you think that the freedom movement falls in like 1 million people or less? Couple? Okay. How many think we're in that like million to maybe 5 million range? A few more? Anybody think it's bigger than that?
I think it's
few?
possibly bigger.
Okay, possibly bigger, yeah. That was actually a nice little spread there. I would say it's definitely drastically bigger than that. And big part of the reason that I decided to do this particular talk in this particular way is because I feel like there's a lot of pieces of the movement that don't realize that they're all part of the same movement because of usually identifying with some particular adjective and then assuming that everyone that doesn't identify with that adjective isn't working for the same thing that we are. I think really the key is what is our intention, what is it that we're trying to create. There's different methods and we may disagree with those methods, but if someone's trying to create the same thing, they're an ally in that sense. They are part of the movement. And if we approach them in that way, instead of shouting down the approach that they're taking, then we can actually shift what they're doing maybe and bring it more in line. Or maybe they're going to shift what we're doing because maybe we don't know either. None of us is perfect. None of us is infallible. We're not the Pope. So I want to list off a few of these movements or organizations, and again, just like a little raise of hands if you feel that, obviously it's a little bit of a trick question because I already gave away that I think that they all sort of are, but if you came into this and thinking that this organization or this movement is part of the same freedom movement, how about the Zeitgeist movement? Would anybody here say that's part of the freedom movement? A little bit, with some nods, okay. So if you look at what it's about, what the goal is, it's eliminating systemic violence, it's eliminating violent hierarchical structures, it's eliminating unnecessary coercion. The approach is just in this very logical, technical, organized way rather than letting the market do it, like just opening it up for all the people. But there's no reason that those two things can't work together. If you actually listen to Peter Joseph, the guy who kind of leads the Zeitgeist movement, in a lot of his interviews he's very clearly laid out that their goals, their approach is based on it being voluntary. No one is going to be forced to do anything. If they were to take over the world, in a sense, like their plan was the model, nobody would be forced to do anything. But a lot of people, like Stefan Molyneux being the biggest one, always use the term like robot communism. Oh, it's robot communism. It's not. That's just not actually looking at what's happening, and because they're using different language than we are, assuming that they're shooting for a different thing. How about the environmental movement, or like the idea of climate change and all the movement around that? I'm guessing a lot of you would probably see that as something that's almost working at odds against us. And I agree that in the way that it's playing out right now, there's a lot of dissonance there between the freedom movement and the environmental movement. But I don't think it's the intentions or the desires or the goals of that. It's the fact that the people, they see these problems that are real. Pollution is a thing. We've got giant masses of plastic floating around in the ocean. We've got air that isn't clean in so many cities. Like, these things are real. And the problem is that the state and the corporations are tricking these people into thinking, hey, let us handle it for you. It's not the goals, it's not the concerns that aren't aligned, it's just that they've been sidetracked. And they don't realize that the biggest polluters on the planet are the US war machine, the animal industrial complex, pharmaceuticals, all these things that are dumping toxins into the planet. But if we can approach them and say, yeah, pollution's a problem. Yeah, using petroleum for everything's a problem. Yeah, agree on all those things that we agree on, and then say, so what do you think about the fact that the US military uses more petroleum than any other entity? What do you think about the fact that the US military, again, has dumped radioactive waste all over the US, all over the Middle East with their depleted uranium rounds. What do you think about these things and say, so why would you want that same entity to be in charge of things? How would that make it better? I think that approach is much better than the coming at it like, oh, climate change isn't real, here's the graphs why, here's all this. And honestly, I would say climate change, they changed the goalpost because now it's always happening. Climate change is always real. Global warming, the graphs don't hold up, but why argue about that when we can take that fire that they've already got and just redirect it in a better direction? So how many of you have even heard of the Rainbow Gathering or the Rainbow Family? All right, we've got 3. I think at least 2 of them are people that I introduced to it. So the Rainbow Gathering is an event. The Rainbow Family is kind of the name for all the people that identify with that event. Started in 1972, and it's happened every year since. The big one happens July 1st through 7th in the US in a different national forest every year. Always in a national forest, never with a permit, because government doesn't own land. That is unowned land that anyone should be able to use. That's part of the protest. It sounds like the freedom movement. You get there, the entire event is decentralized organization. There's no production team, there's no person or people who put it together. It's 50 to 100 plus camps that each individually choose to come out and build a stage to do open mics, or build a kitchen and serve food, or set up a medical tent and provide those services to everyone. 100% decentralized. All major decisions, anything that will affect most of the group or the whole group, including which location it's going to be at that year, is done by council. Anyone who wants to come sit on the council is welcome. And it just goes around, there's a talking stick, and it goes around until there's consensus. And if there's not consensus, it happens at some point, or there's an option to kind of say, well, I don't agree, but I'm not going to block the decision anymore. You can move forward. And at the same time, the gathering itself is completely anarchist. You can do anything that you want as long as you're not hurting others. There's some kind of social customs. There isn't alcohol in the gathering because there's a lot of people there who are former alcoholics. We've found over those decades that alcohol has been the cause of almost every act of violence that's happened at the gathering. But if you're walking around drinking a beer, nobody's going to come up and punish you or knock it out of your hand. Someone's going to lovingly walk up and say, hey, maybe you don't know, we don't do alcohol here. There is a camp just outside the main gate, that gate just being a banner that says welcome home, by the way. There's a camp out there, that's where alcohol happens, so it's not in the gathering. Feel free. If you want to go to an AA meeting, there's an AA camp at most gatherings. But nobody's going to be rude about it, nobody's going to use force. And that, again, that's freedom. That's the freedom movement. But most people, when they see rainbows, they just think, oh, hippies, oh, dirty traveling kids. They don't identify that as the same thing. These are people who almost to the last one don't pay taxes. Many of them don't have any government identification. Most of the folks I know who are children now or grew up in the Rainbow Family were never documented. This is just normal to them. And they don't identify it as anarchy. This is just life. This is just how humans are supposed to be. We're supposed to be free and loving each other and helping each other. There's no philosophy behind it per se, but it's absolutely the same movement. How about, say, veganism? There's a lot of arguments if you get on the Anarchapulco Facebook group. It's usually a lot of back and forth about veganism. There are some vegans who, again, think, oh, the state's the answer, not realizing that the state subsidies are the reason that meat and dairy are so cheap and so plentiful and so advertised. A couple of years ago, the FDA spent over $10 million giving it to Domino's for a marketing campaign for their cheesy stuffed crust pizza. So while there are some vegans who think that using force in the form of the state, which they don't necessarily identify as force, is the answer, most vegans simply want to let all living things go about their own business. And if you come at it, again, if you come at it with those conversations as like, well, Would you say that you own yourself, you own your body, just like that? Like I have no right to hurt you, just like I have no right to hurt that animal? Yeah? You think our interactions should all be voluntary, just like that animal in your interaction should be voluntary? Yeah? You know, if we just focus on the points, the actual principles, the agreement is there, and we can, again, shift that conversation from being one that seems combative to, well, how can you join in with the rest of this movement? And, you know, bring your message. Yeah, come preach your veganism at the Anarchapulco conference or at some other freedom event, but realize that everyone there is free to do whatever they want to do. How about social justice warriors? This realm of, from intersectionality being one word for it, the Black Lives Movement, it all gets lumped into SJWs in a lot of, you know, YouTube videos and stuff, and people harp on it. Oh, these SJWs want to ruin everything. Oh, they're trying to use the state for this and that. Again, some people get tricked into thinking that the state is the answer. But the basis of social justice, this movement in all the different forms from feminism to Black Lives Matter, is there's a lot of oppression in the world. We should get rid of that. There's a lot of unjust hierarchies. We should get rid of those. That sounds a lot like the freedom movement. Again, the way that we move into the conversation, the way that we listen to and actually respond to what's being said, or the way that we don't and we turn it into a shouting match, is the only thing that actually separates us. If you break down, you know, how, let's look at the race side, right? The Black Lives Matter, the police state. Well, if you're concerned about unarmed black men being killed by the police, is it because all cops are racist? Or is it because cops get to carry a gun and get to use it and have no consequences? That's why they kill people of every color. The numbers are different, you know, it's not even across the board, but the base problem is the fact that these people aren't subject to our morality. They're not subject to the laws even of the system itself. So if we eliminate that piece, all of a sudden, this can't be happening. The racism may still be there, but they can't act on it in the same way without repercussions. And these pieces fall in line with all the feminist side. Well, the idea that men are at the top of the hierarchy. Well, if you look at the economics, there are a lot of white, mostly Christian and largely Jewish men at the top of the pyramid. We know the banking cartels, we know these giant CEOs, but that doesn't mean that all men are oppressing women. That doesn't mean that all women are being oppressed. There's a definite, measurable issue right here, and that extrapolation can make it seem like there's more conflict with everyone or with these other movements. But again, if we go to the basic principles and the basic concepts and the things that are very clear and like laid out in history, yes, there's a bunch of light-skinned men who have enjoyed fucking things up for everybody for the last century, and they've made a lot of money on it. Let's end that. Does anyone know where the idea of white and black really came from in America? Are you familiar with Bacon's Rebellion? So 50-ish years after the Revolutionary War, there was a guy who threw a little bit of a rebellion. He got together slaves, dark-skinned, and indentured servants, light-skinned, both of whom were basically stuck doing work for others, not getting anything for it, living in starvation and poverty, level subsistence. He got them to work together, and he drove out a particular native tribe that was having conflict there with them, and he started to push up against the power structure, the banking system. And the same families and organizations that are sort of running things now realized, hey, we've got a whole bunch of poor oppressed people over here and a whole bunch of poor oppressed people over there, and if they get together, they could overthrow us in a minute. We need to make them think that they're different and that one's better than the other and that they should struggle with each other. And that's where the idea of white and black actually came from. Obviously, there was already people that had racist thoughts. There's different religions or different cultures that thought they were better than everyone regardless of where that thought came from. But that's when it became sort of institutionalized or really embedded in the culture, was the people at the top of the pyramid trying to protect their power. And that's what we see happening now as well. If it becomes an argument about the middle class versus the poor, or the Christians versus the Muslims, or black versus white, or any of these things, it takes the focus away from those who use force and coercion and violence and the state versus everyone else who is having those things used against them. How about Rojava? Have any of you heard of Rojava or Rojava and what's happening there? Couple people. So about 7 years ago, there was a revolution in northeastern Syria, right about the time the US was funding ISIS and sending arms to violent Wahhabist rebels over there. It was led by a man named Abdullah Öcalan, who at the time was a Marxist-Leninist. And I would say definitely Marxist-Leninist philosophy does not fall in line with the freedom movement. But it got everybody going, got them fired up. They had this revolution, they broke off. They became, I think it's like the Democratic Federation of Northern Syria is like the full name, but Rojava is what is known as, that's the region. Rojava. So shortly after this happened, Öcalan got put in prison by the Turkish authorities. Turkey is pushed right up against Syria right there. Rojava is on the border between the two. He's been in prison ever since. But in that first year or so that he was in prison, he received a bunch of books by Murray Bookchin and Mikhail Bakunin and some of the other 17th, 18th, and 19th century anarchist philosophers. And he devoured all of it, realized that Marxism isn't the answer. The end goal of stateless classist society is a good idea, but the path to get there isn't going to get us there. And he wrote his own book, which is now the foundation for their whole system, called Democratic Confederalism. It's basically a bottom-up council structure. It starts in the communes or the neighborhoods, and then there's kind of like the city, and then there's the region. And at each level, the council can make bigger decisions, but they have less power, like less. At our community level, we can make decisions about like really finite things that everybody can do. At the larger levels, it's kind of got to be more broad. And it's not based on force and coercion. They're not putting things in place that, right now at least, I'm not saying that this system is going to work forever. I'm not necessarily promoting it, just saying it's something we need to look into. They are one of the most egalitarian societies on the planet at this point. Everyone's basic needs are met, food, water, shelter, by selling their natural resources, the region's natural resources, to other countries, and that money being spent to take care of everybody's basics. They've still got private property, they've still got exchange, there's businesses. It's that perfect blend of communism and capitalism. Nobody starves, nobody's out in the weather, dying in the heat, but no one is stopped from starting a business, being an entrepreneur, doing whatever they want to do. At the same time, all their councils are required to be within a 40-60 split of men to women. So that there's never the room for sexism to really become a massive institutional thing, because no council is allowed within their system that doesn't have a really close to even split.
Sorry, what was that guy's name?
Abdullah Öcalan. Ocalan is his last name. So there's a few others that I listed out, things like Buddhism. Buddhism is basically a philosophy of liberation. It's a little more on the spiritual mental side is the focus, but it's all about liberation. It's about freedom. It's about freeing oneself and not causing suffering or harm to others. Sounds a lot like the freedom movement too. Things like the anti-vax community or the vaccine awareness community as it really is. Things like the non-GMO or the organic community. All of these things are working to cause less suffering, cause less force, allow people to be more informed and make their own decisions about what's going on. And if we go into conversations with anyone, doesn't matter how heated they are, how excited they are and think that they've got the answer, if we go in with genuine curiosity and openness, and don't look at the things that they say we don't agree with as a challenge that we need to come back at, and instead focus on the points where we agree and build a relationship. If you listen to Sterling Lujan, he talks about this a lot, relational anarchism. Let's build the relationships. Let's be loving and supportive and polite and kind. And then it's easy to have those conversations about the things we disagree on. When someone trusts you and they know that you don't want to, tell them their ideas are bad, they know that you don't want to do harm to them, they know that you want to create that same world of peace, love, and freedom that they do, then they're a lot more open to having those critiques or those challenges to the little finer points of where the disagreement is. And that really brings up the idea of words, and there's a lot of charged words. And personally, I'm a believer, it's just a thing, but words have meaning, and those meanings matter. And also a lot of words get bastardized and they get tarred. And obviously we all know the word anarchist has a couple hundred years of negative media about it, whether it be the WTO riots in Seattle where there's a group of military special forces guys who came out dressed as anarchists and broke things, and that got put in the media. Oh, anarchists shattering windows at Starbucks and stuff. Or whether it was back in the 1800s in the labor movement, and again, people coming out and being agents provocateur and then being shown in the newspapers, hey, the anarchists are tearing this down or tearing that down. So personally, I don't use the word anarchist unless it's with someone who I know is on that level. Let's just talk about principles. Let's talk about voluntary interaction. Let's talk about non-aggression. Let's talk about peace in the fact that we own ourselves. We each own ourselves, and we shouldn't be trying to oppress others or force our will on them, and we should expect that others aren't doing the same to us. And those points, I would challenge you to find a single person who would disagree with the idea that they own themselves and it's wrong to aggress against them. I would challenge you to find a single person who would actually think that voluntary interaction isn't the way we should do things. So if we present these ideas in that way, again, we can build that agreement, we can build a relationship, and then you can say, hey, the word anarchy or anarchism, when it's in this philosophical sense, when you look at the movements, it actually just means those things that we already just agreed on. And then the cognitive dissonance doesn't pop up. There isn't a defensive wall because we're not trying to drive through programming that's already been there. And I would say a big piece of that a lot of the folks who come to a conference like this often don't address in the same way is like the word capitalism. Most ANCAPs, when they say capitalism, mean just free exchange. And I understand that, and I agree with that, absolutely. Free markets, free exchange, that's a great thing. We should be able to do what we want to do. We should be able to interact with each other the way we want to. But the word capitalism, historically, hasn't meant just free exchange. It's meant specifically that hierarchical, class-based system. And nowadays especially, it's getting extra bashed in the media because of the move towards authoritarian socialism. So why use the word capitalism when we know it's going to bring up defensiveness? It's going to cause cognitive dissonance. It's going to cause someone to think that we're some crazy, violent oil tycoon lover, because that's what they associate the word capitalism with. Just talk about free exchange. Just talk about the idea of being able to take your idea or your project and share it with others freely. And then later on you can say, hey, just so you know, if you ever hear me say the word capitalism, that's what I'm talking about. That's all that I mean. And this applies everywhere. I have the same conversations with my friends who are left anarchists, and they love to use the word anarcho-communism. I'm like, hey, communism has a lot of meanings that aren't what you mean. Stop using the word. Like, at least as your intro, don't start with that, don't lead with that. Don't don't have the serial killer mask on as you come in to tell somebody how much you love them. Like, take the mask off, set it aside, just have a conversation. Because in reality, even that side, from ANCAP to ANCOM, we agree on over 95% of it. Both sides want to get rid of the state. Both sides want to get rid of unjust hierarchies. Both sides want to get rid of the use of violence and coercion. They just disagree on the economic model that those people individually would prefer to function in. And those two things can exist together. There can be a community of people who all use money and exchange it around, a mile away from a community of people who all just grow their food together and take care of everything communally. as long as no one's using force or coercion, they're just people who may have some disagreements and will have really awesome conversations about it. And I think if we allow those little pieces that we disagree about to be set aside for now, and let's strive for anarchy, and then we can focus on what we want to hyphenate it with. Let's get to the point where there aren't people being carpet bombed and drone striked and put in concrete boxes, and then we can deal with whether you want to share more or whether you want to trade more. Those things are so unimportant compared to the violence that is happening right now, the suffering that is happening right now, and the lack of freedom that most of the people on the planet are feeling. I want to, just for a second, if there's any questions or anything, let's open that. If anyone has a question or a thought, something that you wanted to share that's come up for you, please.
Yeah, the concept of communism in general, it's been so, I'm an anarcho-capitalist, okay? But that concept is so embedded into world history, the Stalins, the Lenins, the Mao's, the rest. I hope that they can come up with a comparable word for what they're looking for, like we've come up with for voluntarism.
Yeah.
Because it really is just two-seated. If I look at that, I'm like, you're probably freaking oblivious, and that's just my initial reaction, even amongst people that I really regard very highly.
Absolutely. I usually just use the word cooperative. I'm an anarcho-cooperativist.
Very good.
That doesn't mean that I'm opposed to competition, doesn't mean I'm opposed to business, doesn't anything like that. I just prefer that in general, things be as cooperative as possible. Mutualism, anarcho-mutualism it's like another 200-year-old philosophical concept that is basically free trade socialism. That same thing that's in Rojava in essence, the idea that no one should be unable to eat or unable to get water or unable to get food, and that we can do that without forcing anyone, and then we can allow all of the other free exchange and all of the other economic stuff to happen on top of that. Anything else? All right. How am I doing for time? Okay. Okay. Cool. So how many of you are familiar with the idea of the gift economy? A few. This is another thing that falls in that same category. That's actually is largely how the Rainbow Gathering functions. At Rainbow, all the kitchens give away food to anyone who shows up. I guess I didn't mention that before. There's no money whatsoever at Rainbow. Not that there isn't currency. Crystals are kind of a currency. Chocolate's kind of a currency. Cigarettes are kind of a currency. But government monies are not something that anyone wants to interact with there. And so I'm part of a 24-hour vegan kitchen. We pump out food for about 2 weeks, 3,000 to 10,000 meals a day. We just show up. All of us bring some food with us. Other people come and bring food. We cook the food. Anyone who's hungry, we feed them. All the kitchens function that way, where anyone who's hungry, you feed them. Anyone who, any time that you need work done, you need help, you just ask for it. I just, tilt my head back and say, we need veggie choppers! And people come over and chop vegetables, or firewood, or go dig a latrine, or whatever it is. And it all works. Every single thing gets done. Everyone's needs are met. All the medical issues are taken care of. All the logistical issues are taken care of. We don't use electricity. We don't use petroleum. We don't really use much of anything from the modern world in that sense. Our kitchen is built out of deadfall wood and rope. We cook over an open flame. But everyone is there to do whatever they want to do. And a lot of times when you let people do whatever they want to do, people mostly want to help. They want to help other people out. They want to be of service. They want to feel that sense of giving and receiving gratitude. And the basic model of exchange there is gifting. It's largely just going around and, I've got a bunch of things, I want people to have them. But at the same time, there is, again, private property or personal property. No one's going to go into your tent and take anything. Actually, there's a rule at the gathering, it's called no ground scores. So if you find something on the ground, the socially accepted custom is to put in a tree next to the main trail, or to like take it to one of the bigger camps and set it there as like a little lost and found. There's also trade. There's a trade circle that sets up when people go lay out a blanket or whatever and exchange with people. And that I feel like that balance between these two things is actually a lot easier to deal with or to create than most of us acknowledge. And it's how we, mostly function in our friendships and our families. I personally, I don't. Maybe some of you do sometimes. Maybe some of you have seen others do it. With family members or friends, if they want something that you have that's not, they don't want your computer or something, but like little things, just gifts. Gifts are fun. Like, how often do you actually keep a running tab of like who bought the last drink for each other, or who took care of that parking at the event, or things like? With people that we trust or people that we care about, it's really easy to let go of that quid pro quo and just give and know that it's going to come back. We're going to take care of it. It's going to work itself out. And I feel like that model can really begin to be applied to the world, especially as we build more 3D printers, as open source gets a lot bigger, as the idea of scarcity becomes a smaller and smaller piece of our reality. And we've got vertical farming, we've got aquaponics, we've got hydroponics, we've got greenhouses so we can grow oranges in Alaska. There's people doing that. These things that use, like the competition, the tribalism is a very natural thing. For a long time in human history, there were other tribes who were on the edge of starvation, and we were on the edge of starvation. And that made us sort of threatening to each other. We're moving past that now. We're to the point where there's no reason for anyone on the planet to starve except mismanagement of resources or some sort of political manipulation. We're at the point where there's no reason for anyone to be homeless. The most recent numbers in the US, there's over 20 empty homes for every homeless person. So on the capitalist side would say like, well, yeah, but you can't make those people, open up their homes for someone who can't pay them for it. It's like, okay, but that means that those homes aren't making any money anyways. As long as that person doesn't do any harm to the home, doesn't damage it, doesn't, destroy that property value at all, what's actually being lost if you were to let someone come and live in there for free? Or maybe we can create a system where, people like woofing, where it's like you come and you do some work and then you get to live for free, and a lot of times you get food for free. A little bit off topic from the main point of the movement's bigger than we realize, but I feel like these little details often become points of contention and very divisive. And realistically, we've got everything we need. We have the technology, we have the numbers, we have the ability to communicate everywhere, we have the ideas. We have so many great ideas from people speaking at this event, people who are just attending this event because they're not a speaker this year. We've got everything that we need to end the state, to end oppression, to end violent hierarchies. And the world's not going to be perfect. There's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be turmoil, but we can do a little better, and we can do a little better, and we can do a little better. If we eliminate war, if we just eliminate war, don't end any of the other forms of violence, just eliminate war, the world's a hell of a lot more peaceful now. There's a lot more room for people to grow and expand and share their ideas if there's not militaries that are bombing those who disagree with them. I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly how to get there. Certainly I would say not paying taxes is the first step. Don't fund it. Don't financially or mentally, don't give resources to, don't support things that you don't support. I've never paid taxes in my life, never filed taxes in my life, I've never registered to vote. Thank you.
Do you live in the States?
I do. I spend most of my time in the States. I was born there. The only interaction I have with the government is I have a passport so that I can cross their imaginary lines without getting shot. And yeah, I feel like every one of you probably has some piece of this puzzle. And the more that we can get together and put these pieces together and share them, the faster it's going to happen, the faster we're going to get there, the more that people realize that all of our ideas have value. Even if it is a really bad idea, that still gives us contrast, and there's some good idea that's on the flip side of that. And I will just put one little shameless plug at the end here. I've got a bunch of booklets that I printed out to bring to this event, largely covering topics like this. One's all about the Rainbow Gathering, one's all about the alternatives to capitalism versus communism. I'm giving them away on the gift economy model. If you want them, I want you to have them, and I'm open to whatever you want to give me. I'll be just outside here after this with them. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking responsibility for your lives and bettering yourselves and working to make this world a more peaceful and loving place. We're winning. Thank you.
Anarchapulco, it's so hype, I'm trying to tell ya. This the event of the year and best vacation ever. Ron Potter, Jeffrey Tucker, just to name a few. Get your tickets, you don't wanna miss it. You should roll through. Talking politics to health and self-improvement to investing. So many things, not one thing. Learn how to live life unchained, yeah. 4 days vibing on the beach, time to connect. All about growth, way more than a conference. This is Anarchapulco, yeah. Let's go.
You ain't seen nothing yet.